Shelf Talks, the podcast where we dive deep into the journeys of female founders bringing their product based businesses to retail shelves. I'm your host, Roberta, and today we're diving into the world of clean, flavorful, and better for you foods with an incredible founder who's redefining the way we experience Indian inspired flavors. Mehek Khera is the founder of Niramaya Foods, a brand that brings bold, nourishing, and thoughtfully crafted products to market. From her deep rooted passion for food to her journey of turning traditional family recipes into accessible retail ready products, Mehek has built a brand that resonates with health conscious consumers and food lovers alike. Welcome, Mehek.
Thank you, Roberta. It's an amazing opportunity to be with you here. Thank you so much. And that was a wonderful intro.
Yeah, definitely. I'm excited to talk today.
Likewise, this is exciting.
So, of course, we want to, dive into the brand, but take us back prior to even starting Niramaya Foods. What does your life look like?
Yeah. So I never thought that in my wildest dreams that I would ever be an entrepreneur, ever have my own business. This was just way too risky for me in my mindset. As we've grown up back home in India, job security, being an engineer or a doctor is really important. And so, with that said, so this was not in my A, B, or C plan of life, but I was in my previous life, I was a software engineer back home in India. So I worked in tech for 2 years, and then I moved to the US, did my MBA, and worked for Walmart for 6 years. And so that was my life. I was hustling and bustling in corporate America, living on black coffee for 7 hours a day without nutrient dense foods or any foods for that matter,
Right.
And that was the life, right? Running from point A to point B, getting projects done, making the ends meet. I was first generation here in the US. So that meant also working hard towards getting a work visa and staying legally in the United States, making sure that my job and my education and my visa all kind of fell into place together at the right time so that I could keep on supporting my family through my salary. And so that was what my life was like before, Niramaya even came out to be or planted its seeds in my brain. I treat Niramaya like it's a whole entity, like it's a living, breathing thing, that is with me. So that helps me kind of, not be alone in these solo entrepreneur discussions, but like treat it like a breathing entity. So I blame Niramaya for planting those seeds in my head when they did. But before that, I was a normal human being with a full-time job.
A normal human being. So, as you were kind of hustling and bustling and, living your life, then what sparked the idea of starting a brand?
Yeah, it all happened by chance and, through life and circumstances. So I was at my job in Walmart and I was working, whatever hours a week. It was definitely more than 40. And it was just the nature of life at that time. Retail is a demanding space to be in and, holiday and back to school and all these events, calls, planning and rush and, a lot of workload. So we dealing with life, dealing with work, and I couldn't get my work visa to renew on time because it's like a lottery process. So I had to go back to school to be able to be a student and a full-time job so that I could be on student visa in the US, and to continue to support my family. And so what that meant was working for the whole week and studying on the weekends. And that meant, flying to the school, attending classes, studying. So I was working 7 days a week and, almost I don't know how many hours a day. So that took a toll on my body.
Oh, yeah.
And, it was quite stressful for a number of years. So I did that for at least 3.5 to 4 years, and that combined with a long commute, poor diet, poor nutrition, just running from point A to point B, had a toll on my health. So I ended up with some chronic conditions, undiagnosed autoimmune conditions at that time. And I was constantly on like an Advil or a painkiller or a Tylenol, just to manage my symptoms,
Right.
but I couldn't get to the root cause of it. And I was completely, confused on what was going on with my body, what was happening. I had all these questions in my mind because after all, I was only 28 years old at that time. And that's not a time when your body should or would start having all these kind of different ailments that, one would expect in, older years, but I was having at that age. So I went back to nutrition school once I definitely had to leave my job because there was no other way to continue the visa and I couldn't stay working. So I had to leave my job. I became a dependent on my spouse. And at the time, I had the liberty to kind of go to a nutrition school and understand what was going on in my body. And so through that program, I understood the basics of nutrition first, like what are macros looking like? What is functionality? What does this mean? How do plants have a serious impact on our bodies? How can we self heal? What is biohacking? All these different kinds of terms kind of started making sense to me. And I started to understand how nutrition itself was so different to different individuals. To some people, it means eating 100 grams protein a day. To some people, it means inflammatory diets. To some people, it means survival. To some people, it means energy. Different things for different people. So I learned a lot about bio individuality during that course, like diets and, food has to be tailored to each one's preference. And that kind of became my passion to do that. So I worked as a health coach for 2, 3, 4 months, just talking to people, giving free consultations, just, implementing my nutrition degree and,
Right. Yeah.
getting to know their issues, like what were they dealing with. And during that time was the onset of COVID as well. So like everybody was talking virtually, Zoom had taken off, and we were all cooking at home. We were all skeptical of going outside. These were the first 2 or 3 months of COVID-19. And so during those months, I think when I was talking to these people, these were mostly millennial consumers, just like me. And so these are the people who, are young adults today or have, newer kids or smaller families, babies. And we were all, like, I could name in hundreds, we were all assembling foods. We were not cooking anything from scratch. Like, I wasn't pulling up a book out of my grandmother's diary and, maybe once a week, we were doing that. But otherwise, we were like, oh, this is an organic boiled rice company that I love the rice from, and I don't have to make it from scratch. So, that goes into the bowl, and then grilled chicken goes into the bowl, and then tofu goes into the bowl, and I have dinner. That's how we were preparing dinner, more like, something authentic or traditional, which was like one way of doing things. So that resonated with me. And I wanted to go back to retail because that had become my toxic love while working for a retailer. I was missing those deadlines, and I was missing back to school, and I was missing holiday, and I was missing all the exciting things, that come with retail. But I wanted to do something of my own so that I could control the stress levels. In hindsight, I didn't know that I wouldn't be able to control any stress. But at the time, being a naive, young founder at that time, so I wanted to bring something to the market, Roberta, that combined that ease that I was talking about, that people were inherently looking for in grocery store shelves. Like, how can we mix 2 or 3 things and have a meal? Or how can we mix just 2 things and have a snack? So there was a blurry line between snacking and meals that nobody was fulfilling on that part of the shelf at that time. And so all I saw was like simmer sauces or meals. I didn't see these components that people could mix and match based on their preferences. Or what if I just wanted to have a bed of rice and dip and, some chips for dinner? Right. We all do that. With that, Roberta, I think we were marrying convenience to nutrition with a backdrop of heritage. So we were inspired by all the ways Indians have been cooking all these years, right? Whether it's my great grandmother's recipe or somebody else's great grandmother's recipes, right? They were all very rooted in the concept of spices being healing, this functional form of cooking where we use, long time to saute our spices to bloom them before we even start cooking anything, from stir fries to different types of curries to different types of breads to different types of the way the plates are arranged in India are all inherently plant forward. They don't have to be forced to be plant forward. They're just by the nature of
Naturally.
culture and family traditions, they are plant forward. In today's day and age, being plant forward and plant based mean different things, but what they can also mean is that everybody has a place for vegetables on their plate, right? Whether you're a vegan, vegetarian, pescatarian, or omnivore, you need to eat some form of plants every day to keep you healthy and fine. And then, of course, there are other components of the plate for your protein, for your fats, and all of that, which you can assemble. So we bring the plants and the herbs to the equation of your meal. So I wanted to bring these dips because they were so rich in nutrition because we were using these real veggies from local farmers in Colorado, like spinach and beets and tomatoes and sweet potato, onions and garlic whole, and fresh turmeric and all of that, and bringing them together into these 12-ounce jars of our dips, which we now sell in Albertsons and Sprouts. So bringing something new to the category, which kind of caught people's attentions, just like the Hispanic aisle has a lot of salsas and dips. And folks enjoy the convenience of that, they enjoy the variety of flavor. And there was nothing in the Indian aisle that was kind of speaking to that consumer from an Indian flavor perspective, right? And so we decided to combine these factors and try to make our case of pushing the Indian category into more categories, if that makes sense, the Indian aisle into more categories. So we started with our dips and then recently launched the naan pretzel, both of which are actually now as sprouts placed in the Indian set, which means that we are aligned at the vision of expanding that set to newer ways of engaging with the same consumer or newer consumer. The possibilities are quite endless.
So just going back, like what made you think specifically of dips? And then how did you, connect with farmers to have their vegetables inclusive in your ingredients?
Yeah, and the second part was easy because the manufacturer that we work with, Roberta, they are in tight contact with the supply chains, shorter supply chains with local farmers, right? Because that helps them reduce their lead times for ingredients, and that helps me get fresh, prepped ingredients ready to enter the kettle for cooking. It's already in prepped. So it's smaller lead times. You get the best of the shelf life and, we can use it. So that was easy connections made through our manufacturer, which was a difficult connection because I had to call 500 people, unknown people, to actually reach the manufacturer that we actually work with now. It took me 2 years to find the right
What?
person. I was really new in the industry. The first call I made was to a bottle co-packer, water bottle packer in California. And he was like, we definitely can't make sauces. And I was like, maybe, I was trying to convince him to see if they can make sauces. And they were like, no, but if you're so passionate about what you do, I have a contact I can refer you to, and through that, and then next, and then next, and the next. Finally, a founder introduced me to the co-packer. We actually, but to reach that founder and to find these connections from coming from the outside of the food world, right, from the other side of the table, was something difficult to do. And once we did, that co-manufacturer actually introduced us, or actually they buy things, they buy the ingredients for us, so we didn't have to. We were lucky in that nature that where the location that we chose was so close to these shorter time, fresh vegetable produce. But the challenge that comes with it is that vegetables are natural, so they are different every time. Sometimes we get high water quantity, less water quantity. So we just have to maneuver around that. The taste and the color can vary a little because these are natural products. They will not be consistent with the same level of green or the same level of red that was once there. Just because these are like different things. One time you get pink tomatoes, one time you get red tomatoes.
Right.
So that's our promise to bring real food. And I think our consumer appreciates that. But to your question on why dips, I think why dips? Because dips were something that the American consumer was so used to. So we think of our consumers like guests into our home, right? And so in India, there's a saying that guest is God. Well, I don't know if I agree with that, but what I can say is that we definitely treat our guests or consumers like the ultimate feedback that we can get. They are the ultimate, they decide our success, they decide our products, they decide everything that goes into them eventually after we present it to them. If we treat them like guests in our table or guests in our house, I would want to serve them what they would want to eat rather than, saying that this is what my grandmother made. But the challenge that happens is that whilst doing that, we do want to introduce recipes that my grandmother made. And, so we try to marry authenticity with accessibility in ways that we use the recipes that are close to my home that brings so much curiosity to the American consumer of today. But then we layer them with inclusivity, which means that if today's shopper is gluten sensitive, we would go and get that gluten free certification, right? So that their mind is at ease that nothing in that jar of dip can cause problems to them or their family. The other part of inclusivity could be being grain free for our dips, or for our pretzels, or being allergen free for our pretzels, because that word changes over time, what people are looking for, whether it's dairy free and whatnot. So that was one of the reasons we selected dips, because it felt a natural, forced connection between the two cultures. So Indians dip, we eat with our hands, right? So it's very natural for us to dip, break the bread, dip it in the curry, and eat it with the hand. So we dip all the time, but we just don't call it a dip, right? American consumers are so friendly with dips, and They buy dips and, they are feel at ease with how it's being used. And, we can eat it with a chip or a bread or, put it on a bowl. There's no explanation required. Contrary to what many people might think of what to do with an Indian dip, it's just the same as any other dip, right? So that was the common angle and natural marriage between the two cultures, which felt like we were not forcing it. It was just naturally existing between the two cultures. We were just bringing it together. And then we were also being cognizant of the fact that, these folks are living their lives a certain way, and we want to be the provider for something that doesn't disrupt that, but at the same time introduces an amazing new flavor that they hadn't had before. So just thinking about the consumer and consumer all the time,
Yeah, I
with
love
each
that.
the dips.
Yeah,
Yeah,
that is so smart just to think about like having like an approachable kind of name almost to it, but
yeah,
then marrying it with something different and unique and like something
yeah.
that, is new for a consumer when it comes to the Indian inspired
Right.
piece.
100%. And also, like, our dips were very satiable. They were not just like spice and oil pastes. They had like veggies in them. They had no oils actually. We don't use any oils in our dips. And they had cashews in them. They had like whole garlic and, jalapenos and chilies in them. So they were dip-like. They were like more wholesome in many ways. They were not just a sauce, which was just a condiment. It contained real food. That's why, dip felt more fitting than a sauce
Yeah.
to us.
No, that's so smart. I love that. Once it took 2 years to find a manufacturer. So number one, taking 2 years, I mean, did you
Yeah.
ever feel like you just wanted to give up? And what kind of kept you going?
Yeah, so I was probably slower than most entrepreneurs today at that time because it took us so long. I think there were various components that were involved in kind of deciding to go all into this business. One was, of course, having some money set aside to fulfill the MOQs of your co-packer, right? Because if you decide to go the route where you are not producing yourself, but rather you would produce at a manufacturer, they would have some sort of minimums, right? And
Right.
those minimums come with a certain cash commitment. So for me, it meant saving up that much money, and that took me 2 years to be able to do that. And then the other part of the equation was finding somebody who you can trust, not in a way that, you're basically outsourcing your business to them, but in a way that you can partner and bring your strengths to the table together so that it can be a long-term relationship. And I had heard so many like kind of horror stories about manufacturing from other like founder friends in many ways that I was skeptical going into and trusting somebody with our formulations, with our product, and investing a heavy sum of money into the minimum order quantity. So as I saved up through those 2 years, Roberta, and then found these folks who were amazing, I could find that, they understood what we needed and they had the capabilities to build what we needed. And we could do their minimums at that time. We were aligned on various folks. They were amazing people. And so it was a no-brainer to kind of go ahead with that. And at that time, I felt like we were ready from a positioning of like having the branding and packaging for our product. So it was ready for the shelves, right? When a buyer saw it or anybody saw it, they could see it on the shelf of a natural grocer or like a big grocery chain, even if we were not there yet. It deserved that shelf space based on our assessment. It had the call outs and everything. It was standing out on any shelf that we would put it on. And so I knew that I was ready then. And also it took me time to kind of come to the fact that it was a dip and not a sauce. And this is what we want to do. These are the recipes. Just the benchtop recipes in my kitchen took time to kind of come to fruition before we even went to a manufacturer.
Yeah. Yeah. So you were doing lots of things during those 2 years to kind of prepare
Yeah,
and get ready.
exactly. Exactly. We had like mock-ups of our packaging, which went through 5 rounds of, improvement because at the end of the day, when a founder is starting out their company, they have a very strong mission in their heart, but that mission has to convert to a meaningful product, and that takes a lot of time. What I knew is that I want to make people's lives better. How? Through nutrition, but through what?
Yeah.
That what takes a lot of time to answer because you have to be really thorough in your differentiation, like why this and why now. And unless you answer those questions, you will take time to kind of know what your DNA is and why are you doing this,
Yeah. Yeah.
you know?
I think it's amazing too that like even though you hadn't finalized a manufacturer and got your final product, you were already kind of doing the work and preparing the labels and like you already saw that it's going to happen, right? You're just it just I mean that's pretty amazing because you already had in your mindset like there is an end. I will have my product final and I'm just going to do the work now, even though I don't see that in front
Yeah.
of me right now.
Yeah. 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 All I did was like kitchen trials or some commercial kitchen trials. So there was a commercial kitchen near us in California at that time. It's called Kitchen Town, and they're wonderful people. They gave us a little bit of space to kind of do some testing outside of my own kitchen, which was slightly bigger, but it was not a typical manufacturing per se, but we could produce like 20 to 50 jars and, just see and have people sample and see how they like it. But it was such a rigorous process, and the process controls were just beyond something that I thought that I could do myself. It was a completely different business. And as a solo entrepreneur, I had to focus on sales and marketing. So I decided to outsource this at that time. But you're absolutely right. All that work went into it even before the product came into our hands.
Yeah. How did you find a designer for your packaging?
Yeah, so that's a fun story. So when I was sick I think back in the days when I was dealing with those autoimmune conditions and disorder, my mom was visiting me from India, and there was this brand on the shelf called Siete Foods, which everybody knows now.
Everybody, right?
And it was back in 2018, I guess. And I was sick and I was like having some gut issues, and everything was like difficult for me to digest. And she came from India, so she was not very familiar with Mexican food. So she didn't know that these were tortillas. She thought it was an Indian roti, right? Because it's very similar in looking. And she was like, hey, I found this like grain free, gluten free roti that you can have because, that won't kind of mess with your digestive system, because I was having a lot of trouble at that time. And I was like, yeah, the packaging looks really good. The first thing I noticed was the packaging. I've been that way growing up. Like, the presentation matters more to me than what's inside.
What's it?
So if you give me like literal crap wrapped in a real, good, gift paper, I will be happy for a few seconds. So I was like, not that the product was bad or anything. I love that brand, and the tortillas were great. But I love the packaging. And so I was like, when I'm ready to have my own business, if I have my own business, I will reach out to this team. And I did. And when I did, that partnership started, and we were very young at that time as a brand. So the conversations took a long time, but eventually we worked with a design agency through that route. They're called Ron, and they're based out of Eugene, Oregon. And so we worked with them for the packaging for our dips as well as our pretzels.
No, that's great. First of all, though, how did you even connect with them?
So I did a Google search for this brand's packaging, and the first result, they did a good job with their Google keywords
Keyword
search
search,
results.
their
So
SEO.
they were on the first page, and I wrote to the founder and then received a reply in less than half an hour. And so that's how it started.
That
It
is
was just
smart.
meant to be, I guess.
Yeah,
Yeah.
yeah, that's so
Yeah.
smart. I don't think a lot of people think about that. Just going to the store and seeing what packaging you like that you feel like
Yeah.
would make sense for your own brand, and then
Yeah.
doing
Yeah.
those Google searches to try to figure it out.
Yeah. It was, I think, thanks to my mom, I guess. She kind of found this, and so I can give all kudos to her for finding
Yeah.
our packaging company.
Which looks great. So that makes sense
Thank
too,
you.
because it just definitely looks shelf ready, great colors, draws you in, and of course,
I
once
appreciate that.
and it's
Thank
not
you.
just like you said, where you just see the outside of the packaging. It tastes good once you open it too.
Oh, yeah, that is so important.
Yeah.
That's how packaging is important, but the product and how you run the company and strategy behind it and all the things, you know it more than me, Roberta, like promotions and shelf placement and right time, right product, differentiation, all that matters so much into the success of the product.
Yeah, definitely. So once you found that manufacturer, so you were working in the kitchen, you were perfecting your recipes, you decided that you wanted to go through a manufacturer. Was that an easy transition once you had your final kind of formula for them to then reproduce, or did that take some time as well?
That took some time, definitely. I think it took 6 months from there to actually get to a point where we could do a production and have that physical product in hand. And before that, we were actually producing in their back kitchen. So we went from our kitchen to the commercial kitchen to their back kitchen, even before we went to a kettle, which was their production line. So although our recipes are really simple because they are made with like real food and spices and mixing and heating and then, hot filling, but it took time from a perspective that we had to align on all the quality parameters, whether that's thickness or taste or any kinds of nutritional profiling, fill rate, all of that. It took 2 or 3 rounds back and forth between the co-manufacturer and us so that they could understand what tastes we were liking, more sour, less salty, whatever that meant for that product line. And then of course, getting that into paperwork. So we were all aligned from a more quantitative perspective, not just like I like this and you don't like this. We were just aligning on all those factors, and then it took 6 months to go from there to production.
Production. So then
Yeah.
you have your final packaging. What was next? Was the initial plan to launch D2C?
Yeah. So one thing that I was so sure about was that I want to be on retail shelves. And even if it's a small test, like, just like two stores in New York or like two stores in the Northeast, I just want to see how people are interacting with the product and buying it, and, what are the velocities looking like, what type of turnaround am I looking for. So our first product run was actually bigger than I expected it to be, honestly, because we produced more bottles than we were hoping because of the yields. So I had a lot of product on my hand to sell after the first product, and we didn't have any active orders at that time. It was just produced because that was the minimum, right? And I took that risk because I knew that the product was extremely high quality, and I couldn't have made it in my own kitchen, and I couldn't have made it in my commercial kitchen, at least myself, by myself, without a team. And so I was least concerned about, like, was this the right decision? Because I knew it was. I was more concerned about, now I have to sell this because I'm sitting on inventory and I have zero sales leads, and this, I have zero buyer contacts. And so I was really lucky that we got a booth at Expo East that year, funded by one of the programs that help founders of color, diverse founders kind of get representation to be able to participate in these big trade shows. So we did participate. We had a healthy turnout. I still remember, one buyer from a really big conventional store stopped by at our booth, and they were like, "We want your product." And I blurted out, "We're not ready yet," because we were so young, and that was the right decision at that time because we were such a baby at that time. We had to figure a lot of other hoops before we even entered their shells, and we did later on. So they were at our booth the first day. So if I had said yes, probably I would have sold all my inventory that I had to them, but I had zero plans for what happened next. So, that was probably a good decision, but that's how we produced and, went to sales. So we first started with a few independents in the Northeast, Roberta, like, Mom's Organic Markets and, things like that, other independents, Brooklyn Fair, all these kinds of shops, and Down to Earth in Hawaii, like all these independent retailers that had started buying from us, some shops in Alaska, because they don't find Indian food there. So we found this odd, like, state demand in Alaska for Indian foods, and it was so high, and I had no idea that Indian flavors would be so popular there. So we started getting orders, and then we went to Fair, which is a B2B wholesale site. So the plan was to go into retail. I was very set in my mind because I had limited money and I had limited time because it was just me. I could either spend it on DTC. DTC also requires some money. It's kind of like a perception that that would be a free route to consumers, but you need a website, you need pictures taken, you need some marketing, you need to tell people that you have a DTC website. I was ready to do that, but on a shelf because I knew how promotions worked and how I could turn my gross profit into sales and then, use that 10% to actually support the shelf, or 20%, whatever that meant. So that was more familiar to me than DTC. So that was like the thing that I wanted to do. So we went straight to retail. We didn't go to, we still don't have a very strong D2C presence, maybe later this year, but it's all retail for us.
Okay. Okay. Did you find those independents at the expo?
Some of them we did find at Expo. Some of them was like, call the store, leave a sample, follow up with the buyer, that kind of a thing. But yes, we did find a lot of contacts at the Expo.
Yeah.
That was a big push for us.
That's great. So once you actually were in some of those stores that you listed, the independent stores, what did early performance look like?
Yeah, so it was fun to learn a lot of stuff actually. So this was my growth as well as the product's growth. Our products were selling well. They were like the first week, at Mom's, I remember we sold out like really early, and I checked out with the cashier one of the locations, and she said that I've been seeing, people come through the register with these dips because we had the new shelf tag, we had the new thing. And because we were new, they gave us a second merchandising on the side of the end cap where they had like healthy new items. But once that went through, our sales dipped, right? because now we didn't have that second merchandising. And so we learned that, okay, we need to do that ourselves. We need to do, some stores allow demos, some stores don't, some have shipper policies, some don't have that. So you really have to learn the environment of the store to see how you can support that store. Some stores it's just promo tags. That's the only way you can really, stand out or get any kind of a secondary merchandising. Some stores you need to be feet on the ground, like Hy-Vee. All that came as like very early learnings for us so that we could quickly pivot and learn from our mistakes and keep supporting. It's a two-way street with sales. It's not just you give the product and then you're sitting, you're waiting for sales to happen.
Right.
It's like constant feedback is coming from those stores. And if you can hear it and implement it quickly, and sometimes that requires money. And that was another hard learning, that you would always require more money that you planned for. And so as a young company with a tough fundraising environment, we quickly had to, so we still haven't fundraised. We have still, I wouldn't say a bootstrapped company, but a debt financed company, because bootstrapping was in our early days where we used up our savings and all that to kind of start the company. But now we are debt financed. And so we have to be profitable. And that's how we are kind of, pushing the wheel forward.
Yeah. Did you have any sort of marketing plan once the product initially hit store shelves?
Yeah, so we did have certain budget allocated for trade spend. And so that was what we used either through our distributors as OIs or through the retailers as scanbacks or MCBs. I try to do social media myself, but hopefully that's not for long. We'd be able to outsource it at some point. But yeah, all these kinds of efforts. And we did a lot of events. So whether it was Vegan Women Summit in Southern California, where, through a room full of people interested in vegan food, we would market our product by pitching or by sampling. Those were anything that could drive trial on the shelf, even if it was not like a heavy monetary commitment of like, a paid ad or something like that.
Yeah.
We would give healthy promotions to our retailers, but also then follow up with our own marketing, TikTok or Instagram or LinkedIn is a big one for me. I feel like there are so many early adopters on LinkedIn. And, these are people you don't have to convince to buy a new fun product. They are already in stores kind of exploring things.
That's
So
very true.
yeah,
Yeah.
yeah. So yeah.
So you mentioned that, once you were in retail stores, you got some feedback and made adjustments. What was that early feedback?
Yeah, so I did a lot of demos and I spoke with the consumer, and the consumer told us that they could really do without the oils in the dips. So we had olive oil in our dips earlier. And so they were like, because this is so like a thing that we can have out of the jar and we can have the entire jar in one sitting. Since you already use cashews, why do you really need oils? And that kind of was a light bulb moment for me. And I asked them, why do you say that? Like, do you not eat oils? And so many people who were natural shoppers were above the age of the target consumer that I was targeting initially. And they were like, I have diabetes or I have this, thyroid condition. And my doctor actually asks me to go on a low oil to no oil diet. But if I like something and that has oil, I can't eat it. But since your product is the only one on the shelf that I've seen with olive oil, I wanted to ask if you would be open to having no oil at all. And I was like, yeah, maybe we can do that because we already have cashews and they have a lot of fat in them. So, we could do without the oil. So that was one thing we made. Then the other feedback was some of our naming nomenclature was confusing, not confusing, but could have been a little more perfect for the consumer. So we changed that based on what the consumer was telling us, just to make it more accessible and understandable to them. We clarified some of the front callouts on the packaging that were speaking to them more. Like, for example, some people, when they see that it's what was the I'm trying, yeah, vegan versus dairy free
Oh,
was like one of the things, because not all dairy free products are vegan. Like, vegan is the broader term that we could have used on the package, but sometimes people have that perception that, oh, if a product is vegan or it's gluten free, it probably doesn't taste good. It probably is a subpar, but it's important to folks who can't have dairy. So we switched terminologies around to see how people are reacting to it. They resonated more with dairy free. So that's what on our package is right now. So we learned that we have to lead with flavor and follow with nutrition. That was one big learning. So a lot of changes on the package, some changes inside our dips were really thick. People told us that, we should thin them down just a tad bit so that when they were cooking with it, it was not a difficult thing for them to cook with. They were almost like meal bases at that time. So that was one another feedback that we got from stores. And so we were listening. So through these demos and events, there was a lot of direct consumer feedback that came
Yeah.
that's very hard to get in retail unless you're doing DTC. So which helped
Yeah.
us to refine our packaging, to refine our product.
That's great too, because like you said, instead of going like to a big retailer to start off, by going to these smaller stores, you have the ability to ask consumers to change things without it being some massive change from a packaging and formulation standpoint.
Yeah, yeah, absolutely.
And it's great that you took the advice of what people were saying, because sometimes as a founder, I'm sure it's like, this is my vision and this is what I know it to be, but you were open to hearing other people's ideas on how to make it more kind of a mass opportunity for consumers.
Yeah, 100%. Feedback definitely is tough for many people to kind of take us as well. I think the kind how I filter feedback is based on two questions, whether it changes my DNA or not. If the answer is yes, it's changing who I am, then it's not a good feedback. But if it's improving the offering that I am producing, then it's a good feedback to take. Like, that's how my basis of like hearing any feedback today is filtered into. And so all that feedback from either the buyers or the consumers was to help us, not to make another version of that, British inspired Indian food that we didn't want to be,
Right.
right? So it was not changing our DNA, it was not changing who we are, but it was making our products more understandable to our target consumer, which ultimately is the goal for everybody, the consumer, the buyer, and, of course, us.
Yeah. That's a good question to
Yeah.
ask yourself. Is it changing my DNA of the
Yeah.
brand?
Yeah.
So how long after you were in these independents, how long before you then entered, a bigger retail player? And what was that
Yeah.
retailer?
Yeah, so I think it was 6 months. I think 6 to 8 months, I would say, because it took us a while to ramp up our production for that next retailer. And that next retailer was the biggest one. It is Albertsons and Safeway stores. So we met the buyers for that retailer and we launched on their shelves through ramping up and some good partnership and some compromises and some discussions. But our launch was anchored around having a strong foothold through our distributors. So my strategy was to launch into these stores and build our distribution from there, because the pull of these stores was strong enough for us to open these distribution centers, so then we could go to these smaller shops that weren't able to buy from us before, if that makes sense. I think we started off with a tough one as a small young brand to be on the shelves of the largest retailer, one of the largest retailers in the world. But I think we have had some great learnings throughout 2024, breakthrough moments, some moments where I felt like, I almost would give up, but we kept going. And through that perseverance, I think now we have almost all distribution centers open throughout the country, where Sprouts is pulling from, where Albertsons is pulling from, Safeway. We are continuously adding smaller natural independents that are now able to access our inventory just because that DC is open. And so sometimes just these technical details can make or break your business, whether you have the resources to supply. And that was in my game plan. And I knew that I have a good product and I knew that, we will be able to find financing as, we are able to have some traction from sales and, retailers. So one step at a time. And so we started with them and then now it's Sprouts.
How did you build up your inventory? How did you know how much to buy in order to support such a bigger mass player?
Yeah, so we had a lot of help from our buying teams at the retailers who shared forecasts with us and who shared some basic baseline sales expectations with us, Roberta. And so then the supply chain teams with the distributor, then they took on. So they have the second layer of connection between the buyer and us. So they convert that demand into actual POs that come consolidated for these different stores and different locations. So once that consolidation happened, we didn't have much time. We were already late to be on the shelf and all of that. So we went back to our manufacturer. I went to the bank asking for a line of credit and I got it. So that was how we ramped up. So line of credit against the PO meant that we were able to pay it back, right? And because we were profitable from day one, that meant that those profits could go to marketing. And so everything that I earned is back into the business. So that's how we were able to ramp up inventory,
That makes
to be
sense.
honest with you.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And then, so once you were in all of those retail stores across the country, what
Yeah.
were sales there? And were you getting any different feedback than you were when you
Yeah.
had those smaller stores?
Yeah, so I will start by saying that retail is tough. It is extremely tough. And so I definitely don't want to paint the picture for listeners that, oh, it's easy, you get this, and
Right.
it's all done. It breaks every bone in your body when you're self-funded, when you have a new product, and when, you are trying to understand who your consumers are. And so I do know that everybody in this world has a need for eating healthy products. But where it comes to really understanding your target consumer is understanding their purchasing power and how well you are perceived on the shelf. So your merchandising and their purchasing power kind of have to match for your brand to be successful, because your price point has to make sense if you can't lower your prices and all that stuff. So initially, when we started selling, our sales were fine, they were okay. And then we quickly learned that in order to succeed, we had to advertise ourselves. We were a young brand. That brand needed to get in front of people. So we got an opportunity to do accelerator with Disney. And what that
What?
accelerator done, yeah. So we did a month to month long accelerator with them. It could have been longer. Sorry, it's a faded memory now, but I don't remember the length of that accelerator. But basically, they walked us through a series of educational sessions or marketing, and then that culminated with a nationwide TV ad for our brand, which they funded. So what happened was, as we were launching with Albertsons, we had that ad airing, and so we had some support and help through that accelerator program, which was great. But then we learned that 3 months in, 4 months in, that we need to have a strong promo game. We need to have a strong scan backs strategically aligned with our value proposition, customers' feedback, and what the retailer is looking for. And so by doing that, we were able to kind of tap into like data, like, okay, we sell this much on a regular week, and we sell this much on a scan back week, and we sell this much during if we did an ad on Instacart. So there was a lot of back and forth learning happening real time on the shelf, which is so crazy because most people advise that, after 2 years of being in like 50 stores, then you go to a big retailer. But we were learning on the front lines.
Yeah.
We were trying to drive on the highway, learn driving
Learn
on
how
the
to,
highway,
right,
right?
right.
Yeah, we were doing that. And so it was really tough. But in hindsight, I think I don't have any regrets, because that pain and that hustle and that struggle taught me what I needed to learn for the brand to move forward. And that journey can look different for different people,
Right.
right? It
Yeah.
doesn't have to be this. You can choose how difficult or easy you want your journey to be and how much risk you're okay taking with, because this was a lot of risk for us. And it was planned risk and it was calculated risk, but taking debt and planning marketing around that is a risky game. So I had a certain sense of belief in my products and my company, which I think was made me okay in taking that risk.
Yeah. Yeah. And smart, just looking at your analytics, looking at your data, seeing what's
Yeah,
working,
yeah,
and then
a hundred
adjusting from
percent.
there.
Change. That's a continuous thing even today.
Yeah.
Like constant learning is something that still happens every day and probably will happen till the length of the time our brand is in the market.
Yeah, definitely. So
Yeah,
so you have the dips on shelf in a number of
yeah,
retailers across the country, which is amazing. And then you decide to launch pretzels.
yes.
So where did that even come from? And was that something that you were planning from the beginning? Or was it something that was sparked from customer feedback?
100%. That's a great question. So when I looked at my shelf, our jars were narrow. They were wide for other jars, but they were narrower compared to any, chip bag or any snack bag. For example, the space that they were occupying on the shelf was naturally slimmer compared to any snack bag or something. What I had as a vision for my brand, Roberta, was to see Niramaya products as a brand blog, something that people can pair it with. Like we were talking about families, we were talking about accessibility, inclusivity, enjoying with family, having dinners, having friends. So it just felt fitting to have a partner product for our lips. Because again, thinking of your consumer like your guest in your house, would you just serve them like, hey, I have this
Yeah,
dip?
right.
you know, that's all I have. Sorry, I can't have any more because, that's too much product on the shelf. But so that was the idea that if somebody is taking these dips back and we are kind of like the first players in this category bringing dips, so we have a responsibility of bringing something else because what will they eat it with?
You're right.
So usually dips and chips kind of,
Go hand in hand.
are but we wanted to do again something different. And so pretzels was again such an American sweetheart product, right? Most people love pretzels. But so naan and pretzels, just like the dip story, like Indians dipping and Americans dipping, felt like it was not forced. Same thing, yeah. Naan and pretzels seem like best friends to me, like from the get-go. Like they should know each other because these are all fermented breads. One is the salty, gooey bread, and the other is a seasoned, leavened bread that's eaten with curries. And here, there are all kinds of flavors and dips with pretzels. And so hard bites of pretzels, already a hugely popular broad category, but less exciting. Like less exciting innovations come to pretzels than they come to chips.
Yeah.
And so we were like, if we did something different, maybe we can cut through a very large category, which is exciting because a large category means that you have a higher success in terms of a lot. People want that product, right? You don't have to prove demand. And then naan was also a very easy term to understand. Most people know what a naan bread is. And if they don't, they know what a pretzel is. And so we tried to explain that on the packaging very thoughtfully and intentionally. Why pretzels? Why now? What do we do? What's a brand? And then this product was grain free. It was top nine allergen free. So it was just too good to not have it on the shelf because people can really have it, eat it, share it with their children. Like if I had children, I would, and they were, allergic to nuts and seeds and whatnot, or I was careful with them, I would find these kinds of products like that were exciting that my child can try because there's so many things that they can't try because of being allergy conscious or whatnot. So this was a very inclusive product. So thinking about that guest analogy, having dips and pretzels felt fitting to me. And then immediately they got a lot of attention from retailers and as well as like good feedback from all around the folks who tried the first sample that came out of this was an oven, this was not my kitchen. So I was not making pretzels in my kitchen. This came out of a manufacturer from the get-go, and their baking line and oven. The recipes were ours, ingredients were ours. Pretzel came from their kitchen. So when we sampled it, people loved it. It was crunchy, it was just delicious. And the best part was that we season it from the inside. So it's not seasoned from the outside, just like other pretzels are. So the other pretzels, they're also delicious, but if you lick them, the entire flavor is gone.
Yeah.
And so then you have a plain pretzel. And so you have two flavors. You have this like basic and pretzel, and then you have a lot of flavor. That's how pretzels are in the market today. What our pretzel was, it was seasoned in the dough from inside before fermentation. So what that meant was when you bite into it, first you just taste the salt, but then throughout that experience, you continuously taste a burst of flavor.
Flavor comes through.
Yeah, through and through. And our spicy one hits with 30-second lag. So it's like you eat the pretzel and then the spices come after like some seconds and they're like, oh, it's right there. So we get our consumers that way from the spice angle too.
So with that, were you initially planning to imagine you were initially planning on launching these in retail?
Yeah. Yes. 100%.
And so was Sprouts your initial kind of goal retailer to have them in?
Yeah. So Sprouts, from a perspective of our target consumer, Roberta, we were talking about like need, want, and capabilities for the consumer to be able to access our product. Those all kind of match for a Sprouts consumer in terms of like I've just heard from like anecdotal experience and like talking to so many folks at Sprouts doing demos. They specifically come to Sprouts to buy gluten-free products because Sprouts is one of those retailers that stocks a lot of these options for their consumers.
Got it.
And whether it's some new functional product, cookie, bar, they have that. And so when that consumer is coming to buy these things, they are the best folks to see our pretzels, right? Because we are doing all of those things too. So I couldn't be more grateful for this opportunity. And there are other retailers that provide the same consumer base, which are on our extension list as well. But Sprouts gave us that opportunity early on to launch, to be a true partner in that launch. And we are on the innovation shelf now, and we'll be in the Indian set in the next week or so. So
Oh,
we are
wow.
launching our dips and pretzels in the Indian set side by side, and those are launching close to the end of this month. So we should be, I mean, maybe 1 week to 2 weeks, we'll see where we land on the launch, but this month for sure. So we'll be on shelves permanently at Sprouts.
That's so exciting.
Yeah, thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
It was a long time coming, and we couldn't be more grateful. Target consumer, amazing buying team, just good people through and through.
Yeah. Yeah. So with all of that, was there anything that you said you came from Walmart, so you kind of knew in regards to retail stores and how they functioned, but once you actually had your own brand on shelf, was there anything
Yeah.
that shocked you in regards to something you didn't know about being in retail stores?
Oh, I knew, but what shocked me was chargebacks because at the other side of the table, I was the one who didn't have to worry about chargebacks. Like, oh, we have these chargebacks. Oh, we have these fees. They just went through the system. But when you're a vendor on the other side, building a business, you have to be careful. I mean, definitely, this word is used as a scaring term, but it's not scary if you plan it well and if you manage it well at the other side of the day. But at the end of the things, Roberta, how things are stationed in CPG, the touch points are the vendor to the distributor, distributor to the retailer, and then the merchandiser in the retail store. So at every touch point, there can be a chargeback. And so if you do not know how many touch points you have, like if somebody is merchandising for you and there's a merchandising fee, there that'll come back as a chargeback. And that adds up with all the fees that the distributor layers. And so if you know what your touch points are and how you can manage that, you'll be fine. Otherwise, that came as a shock to me from the other side of the table because as a retailer, I was least worried about
Yeah,
chargeback.
no, that's so true. But then when you actually have
Yeah.
it upon yourself, it's a
Yeah.
completely different experience. So you just need to make sure, to your point, that you're planning that and knowing kind of
Yeah.
where those charges could kind of lie.
Yeah, but there were a lot of advantages coming from retail too, because sometimes it gives you some empathy for somebody who's sitting on the other side of the table on the buying team to understand what they are going through. Because it's not easy to be in that position either, because you're interfacing with thousands of brands at
Right,
one time.
right.
You're dealing with like tens and thousands of emails sitting in your inbox at every given point of time. And then you have your own KPIs and metrics and, sales to report to. And so just understanding that from the buyer's perspective too gives you some form of a solace that, oh, they're not replying. They're probably not ignoring you, but they're just too busy,
Yeah,
and so gives you patience a little bit, understanding from the other side. Otherwise, it can be very unnerving to wait a long times because retail is a long game. It
slow.
doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah,
It happens slowly. So that was a good part that came out of being from retail, is to have some patience and be like, okay, I can't build this brand in a day or 2 days or even 6 months. It will take time, and maybe, walks in Central Park help me a lot. So go for a walk if you're waiting for a reply, but it will probably happen. There'll be lags and delays in the stuff. So yeah, that was the positive that came out of it.
yeah. That's a good question. Like as a founder and you're working in retail stores, it is slow in regards
Yeah.
to your point. I mean,
Yeah.
definitely, how do you continue to keep that momentum on your side, knowing that you may have to, email a buyer 3, 4, 5 times over the course
Yeah.
of a period of time to get an answer?
No, 100%. It's definitely having an omni-channel strategy too. To That's one thing that's on our radar this year, is to have not all have all eggs in one basket, right? Because some things take time just from the nature of category reviews and their schedules and when the set resets and all of that. But from a emotional perspective, I think just having that empathy helps. That's the only thing that you can do, is to assume good, assume the best, and assume that everybody's there to support you, make you a success. Like there's nobody working against you in the system. Everybody wants you to succeed because that means mutual partnership. And so having that trust and then just like humbleness to listen to feedback goes a long way. If the buyer really doesn't like your product, then they should feel comfortable saying that to your face.
Yeah. Yeah. So how many stores now is Niramaya Foods in?
Yeah, so that's a great question. We are in all Sprouts locations. I think they have somewhere between 450 to 470 stores. They're opening new stores, and then we are with 600 to 700 Albertson stores. And it keeps changing based on how we get placements in different stores from every category review and time to time. You can find a store locator list on our website. That's the most updated, and we do a good job to kind of keep that most relevant. But all in all, I would say 1,000 stores is safe to say,
Wow.
that we are in 1,000 stores today, Roberta, and um, hopefully with performance at Sprouts and Albertsons, we can keep growing our footprint and keep bringing other innovation to the market.
Yeah, that's great. Meg, this has just definitely been a great conversation and hearing the story that has been very thoughtful and intentional in how you're building the brand. And I literally, as you were describing kind of your vision, I see that set of just multiple kind of
Yeah.
categories that fall within this space and within your brand name, which makes sense now that it's Niramaya Foods. You almost planned it to be kind of a a
Yeah.
platform of multiple foods that fit the Indian culture.
Yeah, no, exactly. It's been such a great conversation with you, Roberta. Likewise, and you've asked such thoughtful, kind questions, and I couldn't be more grateful to be talking to you today.
Yeah, thank you so much for coming on. Oh, one last question, the most important. How can our listeners follow you, follow your journey, and also support and, of course, buy Nehemiah Foods?
Yeah, no, I would be thrilled to have you along in my journey. So our handle at Instagram is Niramaya Foods or continuous no spaces. And then on TikTok, we are Niramaya Foods as well. And if you want to follow my personal crazy journey, then I'm on LinkedIn as my name, Mehek Khera.
Excellent. Thank you so much.
Absolutely.